Welcome, everybody, to our virtual session today on preparing for the ADA compliance deadline. We have a full house here. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers. Our first session will be from Adam Thiel, who works with Oklahoma Able Tech. He's the Digital Accessibility Coordinator, and his presentation will be What is Accessibility Anyway? And I'm going to let him jump right in.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Let me get my screen shared here. And there we are. That is the wrong slide. My apologies. I was doing a few last minute edits and got it on the wrong slide. There we go. All right. Thanks for coming today, everybody. My name is Adam Thiel. I'm with Oklahoma Able Tech. And I'm going to be talking about digital accessibility with you today. Like she said, we're going to just kind of jump right in. Uh, Today's roadmap, we're going to talk a little bit about, kind of why I'm here talking to you, who AbleTech is, and then I'll give an intro to digital accessibility, kind of get everybody on the same page for what that means. Then we will talk about some specific laws and guidelines that relate to digital accessibility. And then I'm going to give some basic digital accessibility skills that you guys can start using today to make your content more accessible as you're kind of creating it. And then we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A if I don't waste all of our time with blabbing about stuff. I like to talk. So if at any point I start talking too fast, please let me know and I will try to slow down as much as I can. So. All right. Who is Oklahoma Able Tech and why am I here talking to you today? We are Oklahoma's Assistive Technology Act program, or AT Act. There's an AT Act program in every state and territory, so there's 56 total. And we are here in Oklahoma, we're classified as a sponsored program of Oklahoma State University. So what the AT Act programs do is we provide assistive technology evaluations, consultations, and demonstrations. We also can do short-term device loans. So if somebody needs some sort of assistive technology device, they can come to us. We will help them figure out kind of what devices are available, which ones work for them, which ones don't. If they find a device that they like, we can loan them that device so that they can take it home for a couple weeks, try it out in a real world situation, and see if it's actually going to work for them. If they do end up liking that device, we can help them get a financial loan for their own version of that device. And then we also have a program where we refurbish durable medical equipment. We take in donations, clean it up, and then we'll distribute those back out to the community. So those are all kind of physical accessibility services that AbleTech provides. But the reason that I'm here today is because we also provide digital accessibility training and technical assistance. So we are available to help any state agency, really anybody in the state of Oklahoma that needs information about digital accessibility. And for more information on kind of those programs and just AbleTech more in general, you can go to our website at okabletech.org. But jumping straight into accessibility, like what is it? It is the practice of making information, activities, and environments usable and meaningful for as many people as possible, right? That's kind of the textbook definition. And in other words, it means that ensuring that everyone, including people with disabilities, can receive, understand, and act upon information and services as easily as everyone else. And it's really that last part that is the important bit, right? Like as easily as everyone else. Everybody should have the same ease of use for your content. And if you're designing things correctly, that's easily possible. So just to kind of get everybody kind of in the right headspace. This is a shocking statistic for a lot of people, right? A lot of times when you're talking about, people with disabilities, a lot of people are like, oh, that's a really small portion of the population. Like, why do I have to worry about that? Right. Well, it's about 27% of the U.S. adults in the U.S. have some form of documented disability. And so this number is actually conservative because it is based off of people that self-report. And so there are going to be a lot of people that, either they don't consider themselves to have a disability or they don't, self-report that they do. And so this number is actually fairly low. Um, and so that's a huge chunk of the population, has some form of disability. And so, if you can make your content accessible, then you're kind of automatically reaching 27 to 30% more people than you would have normally. Um, and so, yeah, like that's just kind of a mind blowing statistic that a lot of people don't think of. And it's it comes down to we'll talk about the kind of specific laws, but it's also just the right thing to do, right? It is a civil rights issue. People with disabilities deserve to be able to access your digital content just as much as everybody else does. So um, I want everybody to kind of think through your life, if you can think of some things about accessibility that you're kind of already aware of. So you can think of any examples, and feel free to, unmute and just throw something out there if you feel like it. Don't feel pressure to. But if anybody has something they want to, just a quick example, we'll poll the audience a little bit. Okay, that's fine. I'm sure
I
everybody
mean,
is. Sorry?
there are lots of things. Braille
Mm-hmm.
on elevator buttons,
Mm-hmm.
dings that tell you that the elevator is at a certain level, ramps to get into a building without using stairs.
Yep. Yep. No, those are all really good examples. And so uh, this next slide, I've got a group of images that show some of those things. Definitely ramps is probably the number one answer I get to that question. But even things like automatic sliding doors or curb cuts on a sidewalk. So the little ramps to get down to the crosswalk, and even things such as like captions on videos, right? And so these are things that are beneficial to everyone, not just people with disabilities. And so, like that's really kind of the crux of accessibility, is that it benefits everyone. And so, um, we should be designing our digital content to be, where just kind of like the maximum amount of people can understand and be able to use it. And that includes people with disabilities as well. So, um, so now for the laws and guidelines, there is legal backing for kind of why you should be making your content accessible. Here in the United States, we've got the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's the law that most people are probably familiar with. Even if you're not familiar with that name, it's the law that requires buildings to have ramps and accessible parking spaces and that kind of thing. And so it kind of started as physical space accessibility thing. It's a 30-year-old law, back before the internet existed. And so it has kind of morphed and grown with that movement to include digital accessibility content. And most of the rest of the presentation today is going to be about some recent changes to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, but we also have Section 508 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act that covers all kind of like federal agencies. And then here in Oklahoma, we also have our own Electronic Information and Technology Accessibility Act, or EITA, that kind of closely mirrors Section 508, but applies to Oklahoma at the state level. There's more accessibility laws than this out there, kind of depending on your sector, right? So, like if you work in health, there's also going to be some HHS accessibility laws as well. But these are kind of the big three that we tend to deal with most here in Oklahoma. And so, yeah, so I mentioned the ADA. It is the ADA is broken up into 5 titles. Title II specifically deals with state and local government entities. Okay, that includes libraries, public schools, universities, any kind of governmental agency or entity. And the Department of Justice recently updated Title II of the ADA to specify a digital accessibility standard, and so the wording of the law now says that all state and local governments have to make their web and mobile apps accessible by either April 2026 or April 2027. And there's kind of 2 dates there. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty with that. But it's based off of population and that kind of thing. But basically, like, state, any kind of public university or school system has more or less until April 2026 to kind of start implementing these things. The specific standard that it set is WCAG 2.1 AA. I'm going to explain more what that means here in a minute if you're not familiar. But that is the level of kind of accessibility that is required by this new law. I've got a link here in the presentation that goes to the Department of Justice's fact sheet on the new Title II update. And, if you should have access to these slides after the presentation today. And so you can use the link there, or you can just Google the fact sheet. And it does a really good job of kind of breaking down what this law means. And so a lot of the presentation today is going to come from that information. Okay, so what is the WCAG? That it stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's an international accessibility standard developed by accessibility professionals around the world, and it is a technical standard that defines how accessible technology should work. So the laws tell you that you need to make it accessible. The WCAG is not necessarily how, but kind of what accessibility means. There's kind of a lot of flexibility in kind of how you implement the things in the WCAG, but it's more, just a checklist of you need to make sure that these things are done however you do them to be considered accessible. It is broken down into 3 different levels of conformance: level A, AA, and AAA. And so the law specifies AA. So that means that you have to do everything that's in A and everything that's in AA, but not what's in AAA. AAA requirements tend to be more niche and or just kind of harder or more expensive to implement. And so AA hits a good medium middle of the road where it's kind of like the most amount of accessibility, but it's also still practical to implement, right? So that's kind of why that became the level of the standard. And so, yeah, the new Title II requires specifically version 2.1 of the WCAG, and they update that, fairly regularly as they go. So I've already kind of mentioned some of the organizations that are affected by this new law. I'm not going to go through all of these, but, the important ones for this audience are going to be, any kind of the libraries, schools, community colleges, that kind of thing. So it also affects vendors. This may not apply a whole lot to this group, but I do want to go ahead and mention it because I think it's important that, if you're interacting with folks back at your organizations, that the people that you talk to know that, if you're buying a product for your organization, it needs to be accessible too. So even if it's a vendor has created this product, if you are writing a contract or getting into agreement with that vendor to use that product, now you are going to be required to make sure that it's accessible up to that WCAG level. a big part of being able to kind of hold vendors accountable is asking for things called VPATs and ACRs. So stand for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template and Accessibility Conformance Report. Big acronyms that just mean, it's a document that vendors can self-report their level of accessibility of their product. And so, if you are ever talking to a vendor and you're like, hey, do you have a VPAT for this? And they're like, what's that? That's a huge red flag, right? And so that might be a good, either teaching opportunity for them, right? But also maybe you should point toward a different vendor. And your legal teams and your purchasing teams should be trying to include accessibility language in any of your contracts for this reason. Kind of moving forward, that's a pretty low-hanging fruit that can make a big change. If you don't have language in your contract saying that, hey, any content that we get or any product that we get from you guys needs to be accessible to this level, then that's could potentially lead to some risk down the road. So, okay. So what kind of content is covered by this new rule? And kind of just overarching, it's going to be any documents, web content, and mobile apps.
Adam, really quick, there's some questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I cannot see the chat at all.
No, that's
So
okay. That's what I'm for.
yeah.
Somebody was asking if when you're talking about contracts, if that includes syllabi, and also someone wanted to know about guest speaker presentations.
Sure. So the contract specifically would not, syllabi wouldn't be a contract, but that is going to fall under a document, right? So, and really, like, this is kind of an important point, is that as a as a faculty member, if you are requiring a certain document or even like a web app that your students that you are requiring them to use for your class, it needs to be accessible, because if it's not and that student needs it to be, they won't be able to access that content, right? So we like I said, I'll be giving some tips later on to kind of how to do that. I don't have enough time in this presentation to do to go over kind of all of those things, but there are simple things that you can do to kind of help make things accessible moving forward. But yeah, syllabi would fall under the documents, definitely, and even like I know Canvas is a big, anything that gets put into an LMS, the content itself going into like Canvas itself needs to be accessible, but also the content that you're putting on Canvas needs to be accessible as well. It's kind of two different layers there. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second question.
They were asking about guest speakers.
Guest speakers, that's right. Okay, so that's an interesting one, because as long as if you're not if you're posting their content on your website or on an LMS or anything like that, then it would need to be, you are kind of assuming that responsibility to have it be accessible because it's going on your content platforms. But if it's a situation where you're just, you're having a seminar and another speaker comes in and they've got a presentation and they're showing it, as long, if you're not providing that presentation to your students, like kind of after the fact, that's a really good question for your legal team. I am not a lawyer. I need to put a big asterisk there. There's a lot of kind of questions like this that the Department of Justice has not clarified yet. And so that is a really good question. I would err on the side of, at least asking them if they can make it accessible. And especially before you kind of like provide, like if you're going to give the slide deck to your students or post it on, kind of anywhere you need to post it. then it would absolutely need to be accessible at that point. But that's a good question, and one I haven't gotten before, so that's good. Um, I guess any other questions before I kind of keep going? Want to?
I think we're getting the others answered in the chat.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Yeah. So, and the kind of along those lines, the a big question we get all the time is, well, does this apply to just my kind of public facing content, or like, does it apply to internal content as well? And the answer is yeah, it applies both places, right? So you can't kind of get around this law by saying, well, only faculty members can access this document or whatever. If it is getting posted on the web or in a mobile app or anything like that, it needs to be accessible kind of bar none. The law does not distinguish between public and internal content. So yeah, just kind of more specifically, what types of digital content need to be accessible. We already talked about websites and mobile apps and documents, but that also includes any social media posts, any kind of video content, public and internal content again, and again, third-party products and software. That fact sheet that I mentioned earlier from the Department of Justice, it has. It does a good job of listing some exceptions. There are 5 exceptions listed in the rule. They are pretty specific, and they're not going to apply to a lot of things. Mostly, what it applies to is like archived content, and if you're I don't want to get into the specifics of the exceptions too much, but just know that like there are some exceptions, and again, like your legal teams need to be kind of involved in reviewing those and figuring out what types of content are going to apply. So I always like to follow up this slide, after telling you, hey, everything needs to be accessible. Just take a deep breath. It's all going to be okay. Nobody expects you to go fix 40 years worth of content like overnight, right? Like that's not the intent of this law. What is going to be required though is if anything is currently being used to for people to be able to access a government service or anything like that, and that includes so like any of your course content. If it's current course content that students are going to need access to, then it's going to need to be made accessible. And I mentioned the exceptions before. Those exceptions only apply up until the deadline of when this needs to get implemented. After that date, none of the exceptions apply. So again, like they're kind of like really niche, really kind of corner cases for things. And so best practice is going to be to kind of, draw a line in the sand. Anything from that, your compliance date forward is going to need to be made accessible anyway. And then kind of in the interim, start working toward making anything that's you're currently using accessible. Okay, so we have kind of boiled the WCAG standards down into what we call our 4 core skills for digital accessibility. This is our attempt to make the kind of just really technical jargon of the WCAG more understandable, right? And ironically, more accessible. So the 4 core skills that we use are using good structure, creating equivalent experiences, making content readable, and using color carefully. We're going to go through each of these. Each of these core skills has there's multiple things that fit under each of these categories, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of them today, but I will give some good examples of kind of the types of things that fit within each of these. And just know that there is hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of training available on the internet or you can contact me directly. I'll have my email address here at the end of the presentation. And if you ever have any help with anything, please just reach out, and I'd be more than happy to help you guys. So let's just kind of start walking through some of these. So the first one, use good structure. Structure is crucial for people using assistive technology. And that is because if your content is not structured in a particular way, then people who are using assistive technology can't actually access it. I also want to mention that it is pretty easy to add to your documents with tools that are already built into your software, right? So if you're using Microsoft Word, for example, there are ways to add proper structure to your content in Microsoft Word. And so just kind of as an example, like if you're not adding structure to your content, it looks maybe something like this, right? Where you don't know where things start, you don't know where things stop. Are there multiple paragraphs here? Are there multiple sentences? Or is any of this a list? Or any of these headings? Without adding structure to your content, it's just a giant wall of text, and it's impossible to navigate, and you're just going to give everybody a headache, right? So for today, the thing I want to talk about is, for this category is going to be headings, right? That's kind of the biggest impact that you can have on your content as far as a organizational structure is, sectioning out your content by using headings. They should always follow a logical hierarchy, right? So think like a table of contents. You've got, main points, and then subpoints, and then subpoints of subpoints, and so on and so on. And it just helps keep things all nice and organized. It helps create a similar experience for everyone, because I've got an image of a newspaper, a fake newspaper here, and nobody just reads a newspaper straight through, right, top to bottom. You scan the page, you find an interesting sounding heading, and then you drill down to that story and you read that story, right? And so we want to be able to give that same functionality to people with disabilities that are using assistive technology. And the way to do that is by using good heading structure. One of the ways to do that is, like I mentioned, Microsoft Word. That tends to be pretty ubiquitous across most campuses for sure. And instead, most people, when they learn how to create a heading, you select the text, you make it bigger, you make it bold, you might change the font, right? And those are all good things. Those do help kind of visually set that text apart from the rest of the text, but it's not functioning as a heading unless you tell the computer that, hey, this set of text is a heading, and specifically what heading level it is. And so in Microsoft Word, you would use the styles pane to be able to do that. Again, like we offer trainings on kind of how to do all of that. I'm not going to get into that today just for the sake of time, but just know that thinking about using good structure in your documents is an important thing. For the second skill, creating equivalent experiences, you want to make sure that you're taking into account that no two people are going to experience your content in the same way, right? Everybody's got different preferences or abilities. And so you need to be trying to design your content in a way that kind of facilitates everybody being able to experience it. One of the most common ways to do that is by adding image descriptions. So some of you may already be adding alt text to your images that you add into your content. That's great. That is, like I said, the most common way to kind of do this for core skill. Every image that you add to your content needs some kind of image description. And alt text just tends to be the most common way to do that. The kind of other alternative to alt text is if you have an image that is just decorative and it doesn't really have any meaning. It's kind of just eye candy, right? If you took it away, you're not taking away any important information, right? And in that case, the image description that you would use would be to actually just mark it as decorative. Most LMSs or uh, content creation platforms have a way to add alt text and mark an image as decorative. Hopefully, most of you are already kind of familiar with that. It tends to be one of the most common ways. So, but the some of the questions we get most of the time are, it's like, okay, I know I need to write alt text, but like, what do I write? Like, how do I describe this image? And we always tell folks that, it's kind of like old game of, telephone, right? So how would you describe the image to somebody over the phone, right? If I'm trying to explain something to you, explain an image to you, I'm not going to necessarily just like kill you with details, right? That aren't important to the meaning of the image. You're going to be, uh, you know, giving more of an overall idea of the image, and so you don't have to get too technical with this. Um, the go ahead and go to the next slide. But the kind of the most important thing to keep in mind while you're thinking about writing your alt text is the context of that image. Okay, and that is because if you have the same image but used in two different contexts, then they will need two different alt texts.
Adam,
Um,
question in the chat.
sure.
It says, does the alt text need to include any and all text included in the image, even if it's not relevant? Is there a practice limit to
Okay.
alt text?
Gotcha. Yeah. So that is that's a special case where you've got an image that has text in the image already, and creatively that's known as an image of text, right? So that's kind of the phrase. But best practice is usually if the image already has text in it, then yes, include all of that text in the alt text. It's going to depend on the context. If it does have some information that's like not really relevant to kind of what's going on, then you do have alt text is subjective, right? So as the content creator, you know why you chose that image and why you're putting it into your content better than anybody. And so really, you should be the one kind of determining what you should be writing in the alt text. But it's hard to say whether specifically like I would add everything, because it is going to depend on the context that it's in. But generally speaking, yes, if it has text in the image, then I would add it to the alt text. And I want to do just kind of a little example here. If I were to show you this picture, right, what would you write for the alt text? And like anybody just throw something out if you feel like it, no pressure again, but
Puppy on a park bench that isn't much taller than the bench itself, and it is certainly higher than the puppy.
I like that. That's
But
good.
I probably wouldn't put all of that in there, but depending on what the context of the message was.
Yep. And that is the point of this experiment, right? Because puppy on a park bench or corgi on a park bench is like the number one answer I get to this, and it's wrong. This is a killer dog on the loose, right? The authorities are searching for a vicious dog attacking people downtown park. If you see this deceptively cute beast, don't approach it, save yourself, right? So the context completely changes the alt text that you would write for this image. And so, in this context, maybe you would write a more detailed description of the dog, right? So that if somebody sees it, that they, it's got a, might describe the collar and, like what its name is if you knew it, and that kind of thing. So, really just thinking about the context is the most important thing for image descriptions. And before I move on to the next core skill, does anybody else have any questions about alt text? I forgot to pause at the end of the last core skill, so make it up for that. Okay, I did such a good job. I'm just going to move on. Okay, so core skill 3, making content readable. This is a big one because if you are making your content hard to read on purpose, why? Don't do that, right? We want to make sure that things are as easy to read and understandable for people as possible, because that's the whole point of content, right? Is for people to be able to understand what you're trying to get them to understand. A big part of this is considering the reading level of your content, right? Any kind of public facing content, we generally say should aim for an 8th grade reading level or lower. That tends to be the average reading age of adults in the United States. And you can use a tool called Hemingway, or lots of other tools do this too, but like that, that's one of our favorites. And it will allow you to type or paste text into it, and it will really quickly give you a reading level score for that. It also points out, kind of problematic sentences that like maybe it's too long or it's too complicated, and it kind of works like Grammarly, right? You can get in and kind of really quickly edit your content for that. But obviously, if you, we tend to recommend an 8th grade reading level for any content that you kind of don't know who your audience is. But, if you're, teaching a graduate level science class, right? Like obviously you're probably not gonna be able to get that down to an 8th grade reading level, and that's fine. Still right for your audience, but just be considering the reading level of your content goes a long way. Along those same lines, using plain language is a big one, right? You want to, if you have any acronyms, if you're, you guys don't have any acronyms, right? That's a joke. My wife's a teacher, so acronyms all over the place. The first time you use them, spell them out so people know what that acronym stands for, right? Don't assume that people just know what those acronyms are. Or if you can get away with it, just don't use acronyms. Just spell it out every time. And that takes away the ambiguity and, just takes away that cognitive load. So you're not having to remember what all these acronyms mean. You also want to try to avoid, legalese, right? Hard to understand, overly technical jargon for no reason. Make it easy to understand. Active voice tends to be more understandable than passive voice, and you want to make sure that you're using like the same terms consistently throughout all of your content. Plainlanguage.gov is a really good resource for kind of understanding different things about plain language. And so here's a good example of the content in the before column was used on a government document, and they've taken that and rewrote it. And it's much easier to read and understand. And they say the same thing, right? Just in 2 different ways. And one is a lot easier. And so, again, like the plainlanguage.gov has a lot of good examples like this, and they do it exactly like this. It's a before and after, which I like, instead of just giving you the after and not showing you what it used to be. So,
Adam, we have a question about links, and Clarissa did answer it in the chat, but I'll go ahead and ask it here as well. What is the best way to make links within the text accessible? Leave as the actual URL address or as a word or phrase where the link goes to, and should it be in a different color, font, and size to distinguish it?
Gotcha. Yes. So you want to use descriptive links. You typically don't want to leave the URL, because when somebody encounters, so for example, if somebody's using a screen reader software, they can navigate from interactive element to interactive element in your content. When they hit a link, it's going to read out https://www, and I'm already bored, right? Like, and it's not useful information, right? They don't necessarily actually need to know what the URL is. Context matters there a little bit. They might, but generally speaking, it's a lot better to have something that just says, you know, plainlanguage.gov, as opposed to https://www.plainlanguage.gov, right? This is a little bit of a strange situation on this slide, specifically because plainlanguage.gov is the name of the thing. Normally, I wouldn't have the .gov on there, right? Because it's kind of unnecessary. But yeah, descriptive links are always better than URLs. Especially for like digital content. If it's being printed, then you may want to include both, because you can't click paper, right? So if if you've made a link descriptive and you print it out, now you've lost where that actually goes, right? And so listing them both out that way can be helpful depending on the document. And as far as like the way that they look, I always recommend underlining your links, because the only things in your content that should be underlined are links. Don't use underlining for emphasis, because in today's digital age, somebody sees something underlined, they automatically think it's a link. And so just lean into that, right? You can't fight human nature. So you do want to differentiate your links from the body text in some way. Underlining is the simplest way to do that. And most of the time, in whatever program you're building the content in, it's going to do that automatically for you. If you paste in a link, it's going to underline it and turn it blue, some shade of blue usually. The color itself doesn't really matter. That just tends to be the default. But
I was just gonna interrupt to say that we've got about 3 minutes till the next presentation.
oh, we sure do. Okay, need to get going. See, I told you I like to talk. Okay, we getting some good questions though, so that's good. Okay, so I'll just go through these pretty quickly. Fonts, think about your font choice, right? Like, don't pick something that's hard to read. Try to use at a minimum of 12 point or larger on most documents. I've got an asterisk there because that's going to depend on your font choice, right? 12 point Arial looks much different than 12 point Times New Roman, for example. And I can't tell you what a good font is. That's something that is subjective, but you do want to keep in mind that people should be able to read your content. Okay, core skill 4, using color carefully. I'll go through this one pretty quick. Everybody sees color differently, and so that means we can't rely on our eyes to know what good color contrast is. You need to be able to differentiate between different colors in order to understand the content. And so you have to use a third-party tool to be able to check for color contrast up to those WCAG standards. Our favorite one to use is TPGI's Color Contrast Analyzer. It's an image of it there on the screen. 2 clicks, and it will tell you the contrast ratio between those 2 colors. Basically, that tells you the difference in brightness level between the 2 colors. And the WCAG standard requires a minimum contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 or higher. And so all that means is, kind of the general rule is don't put light text on a light background and don't put dark text on a dark background, right? You want there to be a good contrast differentiation between those colors. Another important part of color is making sure that you're not using color as the only way to tell things apart. You can use color but you want to use color in at least one other way. And that's because if somebody's colorblind or they have low vision, they may not be able to tell it apart if color is the only thing that's different between two things. And so, I've got just a silly example here, press the red button. The buttons are the same color. Which button do I push, right? And it's because this guy's colorblind. He can't tell the difference, right? And so instead, if it just has the words, what each color is, or if it, had a symbol for red and a symbol for blue, just some other way to tell those things apart, then that doesn't become an issue anymore. And yeah, that's it. That's 4 core skills. So using good structure, equivalent experiences, making your content readable, and using color carefully. If you can kind of start thinking about those things as you're making your content, you'll be well on your way to making things accessible. So thank you for letting me just kind of blast through a lot of that. But do we have time for any more questions?
No, we're right exactly to the minute on time. Thank you,
Okay, all right.
Alex.